Good afternoon, fellow humans. Welcome to this video. I am doing a book report on Jack Kerouac's Big Sur.
Cashmere hills filled with evergreens flowing from the clouds down to meet the sea with a granite cliff as a referee. Crimson sunsets and golden dawns, the mother deer with their newborn fawns all under Big Sur sky.
Before I get into the contents of this book, I want to make a few points first. The first point is I thought Big Sur was a mountain when I first picked it up. It shows how geographically ignorant I am. No, Big Sur is basically a coastline on west of USA. And this entire time reading the book, I was like, when is he going to get to that mountain and chill? The second point is that Jack Kerouac actually wrote this within 10 days on the spot with some typewriter device. Like, he would be having these adventures and he would be writing about them as he was living them. And I admire him for that. Third point, he was known for being a guy who was always out and about. Like, he was always traveling, experiencing new things in different places, always constantly meeting new people. And he wrote about it in On the Road, which is the book that made him famous. This seemed like the peak of his traveling, but he wasn't super famous before writing this book, before this book got published. And On the Road was published in 1951, and this book, Big Sur, was published in 1962. So in this book, he does come off like, you know, the romance of traveling has disappeared, it's worn off, and now he's this guy who drinks a lot of alcohol now and is kind of depressed. And he's kind of dependent on it, and he gets moody without it. He's also very well known at this point and admired, and that's something he's been having to adjust to. You know, this is the difference between being excited that you're going to travel a lot and hop on a bunch of planes, like in our present time, versus, damn, I gotta get on another plane. It's kind of like that. The fourth point is that there's actually a bar in the same city as my university. It's like literature themed. Like the menu, like the drinks in the menu are named after book titles. And each menu item, each book title comes with a quote from that book. And Big Sur was part of that menu. And when I saw that quote, I was like, damn, I gotta read this book. What a beautiful quote. And that's partly why I came to Big Sur. Like that's partly how I got to Big Sur. And of course I visited that bar and I drank Big Sur. So how I came to this book, like the other parts of it, I'll try to keep it boxer brief, but it's a winding fucking story. So last year, around this time of filming, last year, 2022, I was very into journaling, and I was teaching myself German, and I was trying to do a lot of creative writing and also journaling, and I stumbled upon Hunter S. Thompson's works during early summer in 2022, and I noticed that he was a pretty wild guy. I love that he did this thing called gonzo journalism, and he pretty much coined that term, where he's a journalist, right, and he would report on an event. But instead of making it like an objective, factual report where the event was the center of his report, he would make it a subjective report where he was the center of it. And he was the center of it, and he was observing all these things going on around him. And that was kind of in line with how I wanted to write. Like, I wanted to journal about my life, but I also wanted to make it kind of literary, like in a story format. So that led me wanting to plan things for myself, like planning days and planning activities just so I could write about it, but also, to enjoy it. But it was mainly as like a writing exercise, in German too. I was trying to get better at the language. During Labor Day weekend here in Canada, I decided to go to Ottawa, and I decided to do like a proper trip in Ottawa. Like I planned an itinerary, visited some museums and these places I wanted to go to, and part of that was visiting bookstores. So I go to this bookshop, and I remember, I'm in like this mood, like I want to go on adventures and I want to write about it, like Hunter S. Thompson. And I find the book The Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac, and I see the word rucksack wanderer on the cover, and I'm like, holy shit, that's something I would describe myself as. I try to carry one bag with me when I travel, and I'm solo, and I'm like journaling pretty often. I'm a rucksack wanderer, and I'm just experiencing these things, as generic as that sounds. So yeah, I'm feeling free and young and having a blast, and reading that book at that time really complemented that kind of thinking. And yeah, I found it very pleasurable to read at that time. At the same time, I also missed being a university student. I graduated like a year and a half before that time I visited Ottawa. And before that time, I found out about Hunter S. Thompson, and I just like the idea. I just miss the idea of learning and that being your life, like your life centered around learning and studying. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna explore my university for a day. I'm feeling nostalgic, and I'm just gonna see what it's like. And it was enlightening because I ended up thinking, okay, it feels weird to be here. Like, I've outgrown this part of my life. I'm actually ready to be in the adult world, and I'm grateful that I'm past this because I like the adult world much better. And that's when I stumbled upon that. That's when I found out about the bar that I was talking about earlier, and that's when I saw Big Sur in the menu, and I'm like, holy fuck! I just read the Dharma Bums, and maybe I should read this book. And the quote was, "It always makes me proud to love the world somehow. Hate so easy compared." And after I read that, I'm like, okay, I'm fucking reading this book. That's such a beautiful quote. That's like a beautiful quote about the world. It's easy to be cynical and pessimistic. Yeah, so I visited that bar and I drank Big Sur. Jack Kerouac writes about real events and with real people, and he gives all of them fake names. And Big Sur is actually part of a larger series of books like that called the Deleuze Legend. There's like a character key somewhere online for his books. Like this certain character in this book in this book matches this real life person that Jack Kerouac has a connection with. And he has written that when he's in his old age, he's just gonna sit back with these books and change the names so that they're real, and then just read and reminisce. And I find that pretty awesome. I'll also be reading 1-star reviews of this book. I find it beautiful that people can despise a book so much that they rate it 1 star, and that same book can be so impactful to somebody else. It shows how different the human experience is and our preferences. And when I read a 1-star review, it always seems like that reviewer was like really emotionally driven when they decided to write that review. Like, holy fuck, I hate this book so much. I'm gonna go on my keyboard and type about how much I hate it. It's always so blunt, like brutally blunt. I'm gonna get to the actual contents of the book now. My copy of the book starts off with a quote here, which I really like. "My work comprises one vast book like Proust's, except that my remembrances are written on the run instead of afterwards in a sick bed." So in the beginning, chapter 1, he starts off worn down from the fame he's been receiving from his famous book On the Road. Like, he's got to wear disguises when he goes out, and he's been drinking a lot. He's trying to go on an adventure, but he has to hide himself in public because in case he bumps into any fans. He's just sick of fame, and he wants to escape and be alone from it all. Drunken visitors puking in my study, stealing books and even pencils, me drunk practically all the time to put on a jovial cap to keep up with all this, but finally realizing I was surrounded and outnumbered and had to get away to solitude again or die. So, his need for solitude is pretty extreme at this first chapter. So anyway, to summarize this entire book, Jack goes from wanting to be alone to being alone in a cabin in the woods for 3 weeks, to going back to the city to meet his friends, to going completely insane, I'd say. And Elliot's and Billy's company don't help. I'm just gonna spit out random points that I found interesting about this book, or commentary that I want to say as I was reading this book. Elliot and Billy and their relationship with each other is strange. So Elliot's the mother of Billy, who's like a 6-year-old kid, and their interactions with Jack are also strange. And that's as far as I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna say too much about how the nuances of their connection with each other, because it's just strange to say. But I want to read this passage. To paint the picture. In the middle of the night, she fetches the little 4-year-old boy to show me the spiritual beauty of her son. He is one of the weirdest persons I've ever met. He has large liquid brown eyes, very beautiful, and he hates anybody who comes near his mother and keeps asking her questions constantly, like, "Why do you stay with him? Why is he here? Who is he?" Or, "Why is it dark outside?" Or, "Why does the sun shine yesterday?" Or anything. He'll just ask questions about everything, and she answers every one of them with extreme delight and patience till I say, "Doesn't he bother you with all these questions? Why don't you let him croon and goof like a little child? He's tugging at your knee, asking everything, man. Why don't you just let him sing-song?" She answers. I answer him because I may be missing his next question. Everything he asks me and says to me represents something important about the absolute I may be missing. So yeah, that's not even scratching the surface of how weird their connection is. It seems refreshing to be alone in nature after being in the city, surrounded by people, and vice versa. It reminds me of this Lord Byron quote, "I only go out to get me a fresh appetite for being alone." And yeah, it works both ways. When you're alone, you get a fresh appetite for wanting to be social. and the thoughts we have between these environments, like being alone and being in a social environment, the thoughts we have kind of differ. Infancy conforms to nobody. The infancy of the simplicity of just being happy in the woods, conforming to nobody's idea about what to do, what should be done. Life is not an apology. Long nights simply thinking about the usefulness of that little wire scourer, those little yellow copper things you buy in supermarkets for 10 cents, all to me infinitely more interesting than the stupid and senseless Steppenwolf novel in the Shack, which I read with a shrug. This old fart reflecting the conformity of today, and all the while he thought he was a big Nietzsche. Old imitator of Dostoevsky, 50 years too late. He feels tormented in a personal hell, he calls it, because he doesn't like what other people like. Better at noon to watch the orange and black Princeton colors on the wing of a butterfly. You know, there's something simple about being alone in the woods, like being on vacation. You don't have to think about all these big adult obligations and responsibilities that we're tied to. Bad review number 1. I'll say it again. Jack Kerouac must have been an excellent cocksucker to find some horny-ass editors and publishers and critics to achieve the success he did. Because all of his books are effing adolescent nonsense. File him in the children's section with a warning label attached. This book contains sexual content as well as absolute tripe. This book also captures the joy of travel, and 2 passages capture how it feels. I fall asleep in the chair, and when I wake up, I'm facing the thick little tangled woods outside the door, and I suddenly remember them from long ago, even to the particular clumpness of the thickets, stem by stem, the twist of them, like an old home place. But just as I'm wondering what all this mess is, bang, the wind closes the cabin door on my sight of it. So I conclude. I see as much as doors will allow, open or shut, adding, as I get up in a loud English lord voice nobody can hear anyway. An issue broached is an issue smote, sire, pronouncing issue like issue, and this has me laughing all through supper, which is potatoes wrapped in foil and thrown on the fire, and coffee, and hunks of spam roasted on a spit, and applesauce and cheese. And when I light the lamp of after-supper reading, here comes the nightly moth to his nightly death at my lamp. Very simple living, you know, but also simple joys. Simple but impactful. And everything in my life seems beautiful again. I even start remembering the nutty things of the binge and go back even farther and remember nutty things all through my life. It's just amazing how inside our own souls we can lift out so much strength. I think it would be enough strength to move mountains at that. To lift our boots up again and go clomping along happy out of nothing, but a good source of power in our own bones. I also like how this book captures the sadness of ending a trip. No blue jays yakking for me to wake up anymore. No gurgling creek. I'm back in the Grooky city and I'm trapped. And and he doesn't like where he is because of his circumstances, being famous, being burnt out from fame, being alcohol dependent. I also like how he talks about how he brings up solo travel versus traveling with others, and how there's a right time and place for both, for either. I feel excited to be with the gang, but there's a hidden sadness too, and which is expressed later by Monsanto when he says, "This is the kind of place where a person should really be alone, When you bring a big gang here, it somehow desecrates it. Not that I'm referring to us or anybody in particular. There's such a sad sweetness to those trees, as though yells shouldn't insult them or conversation only." Which is just the way I feel too. If I were traveling with people, I would focus on the social aspect of things. I would focus on traveling with those people instead of the place itself. But when I solo travel, I get to focus on the place itself and the landmarks and all that shit. So that's just my take on solo travel versus traveling with others. Ideally, I would want to see certain places first and do my solo traveling, and then travel with people in the future. But that's just me. Bad review number 2. Rich guy makes everything about himself and whines for 160 pages and writes a meh poem. So throughout the story, Jack gets progressively paranoid and irrational as the story progresses, if you can even say it progresses, due to alcoholism and his inability to adjust to fame, and also losing the romance of the road. Can it be that Ron and all these other guys, Dave and McClear or somebody, the other guys earlier, are all a big bunch of witches out to make me go mad? I seriously consider this, remembering that childhood reverie I always had, which I used to ponder seriously as I walked home from St. Joseph's parochial school or sat in the parlor of my home, that everybody in the world is making fun of Money Me, and I don't know it because every time I turn around to see who's behind me, they snap back into place with regular expressions. But soon as I look away again, they dart up to my nape of neck and all whisper there, giggling and plotting evil, silently. You can't hear them, and when I turn quickly to catch them, they've already snapped back perfectly in place, and are saying, "Now the proper way to cook eggs is," or they're singing Chet Baker songs, looking the other way, or they're saying, "Did I ever tell you about Jim that time?" So yeah, paranoid guy. And I realize everybody is just living their lives quietly, but it's only me that's insane. I found it funny and cute how he cared so much about his cat Tyke passing away. I find it beautiful how it was expressed. Ordinarily, the death of a cat means little to most men. I completely disagree, by the way. I have a cat myself. I haven't experienced this yet, but it would impact me a lot. It would mean a lot to me. Ordinarily, the death of a cat means little to most men, a lot to fewer men, but to me and that cat, it was exactly and no lie and sincerely like the death of my little brother. I love Tyke with all my heart. He was my baby who, as a kitten, just slept in the palm of my hand, with his little head hanging down, or just purring for hours, just as long as I held him that way, walking or sitting. He was like a floppy fur wrapped around my wrist. I just twist him around my wrist or drape him, and he just purred and purred. And even when he got big, I still held him that way. I could even hold this big cat in both hands with my arms outstretched right over my head, and he'd just purr. He had complete confidence in me. I remember my cat for the first time in 3 hours and let out a yell. That scares Billy. I feel this guy, man. I feel this guy. And I didn't know that cats could be so small that they fit in the palm of your hand. Bad review number 3. Don't see how this could enrich anyone's life. I know he is well read, and I am sure I am missing the boat. Read if you aren't crazy ass drunks going ape. Now, like I said, Jack wrote this book on the spot, and I find his reasoning for his drive to write really beautiful. But because if I don't write what actually I see happening in this unhappy globe, which is rounded by the contours of my death skull, I think I'll have been sent on earth by poor God for nothing. And there's also this point about, like, he also says his point of view on people who he perceives not to live such a complex life that they feel the need to write. Do you ever look at some people who seem like their lives are so happy and simple, and like everything works out for them, or they're just competent and they have it together and it seems so flawless, and they don't need to contemplate like super deep on stuff to get by or to solve problems, like people who seem like that on the surface at least. This quote reminds me of those people. Besides, I can see from glancing at him that becoming a writer holds no interest for him, because life is so holy for him, there's no need to do anything but live it. Writing's just an afterthought or a scratch anyway at the surface. Like, yeah, man, like, you live life, and life is like the main thing, you know, these experiences, and then writing is just an optional thing that you do later if you want to, or if you want to get a bit more out of it. But like, the experience itself is the main thing. But I feel like when you reflect on things through writing, you extract value from it, and you can use it to guide you in future situations, like things you will do next time you encounter that same situation, and things you won't do, or you sort out, you know, maybe you have different feelings, conflicting feelings or mixed feelings about a certain thing, and writing it clears things up, at least for me. As he goes through his adventures in this book, there are self-realizations that are heavy and come from experience, but also reflection. I realize I'm just a silly stranger goofing with other strangers for no reason, far away from anything that ever mattered to me, whatever that was. Always an ephemeral visitor to the coast, never really involved with anyone's lives there, because I'm always ready to fly back across the country, but not to any life of my own on the other end either, just a traveling stranger. Yeah, man, that kind of describes his lifestyle. Remind me never to read Jack Kerouac again, because this book was a total drag and pure torture. The author's attempt at creative writing made me gag, and the desire to run screaming and throw myself promptly off a cliff. I would recommend this to anyone that needs intervention and a good reason not to drink. Now on to better books. I found it really fitting how he mentioned James Joyce in this book as well, because they both do stream of consciousness, and they both value being truthful in writing. I suddenly remember James Joyce and stare at the waves, realizing, all summer you were sitting here writing the so-called sound of the waves, not realizing how deadly serious our life and doom is. You fool, you happy kid with a pencil. Don't you realize you've been using words as a happy game? And that's kind of relatable. I've been journaling in German so I could practice the language, and it's been fun, like, making my life a bit literary. But at the same time, like, I gotta realize, like, these writings are about real shit, like real life, real experiences, maybe sometimes even heavy shit. They capture growth, you know? They capture, whatever, human development, my progression as a human being, and my life experiences, which are real shit, you know? Here I am, like, when I'm writing in the moment, it's like, I'm making, wow, this sounds so good, and I'm making this sound so good, and I'm bettering my German, and yeah, it's not as trivial as it may seem, or it's fun, but it's more than just fun. It's some profound shit. I liked how in this book it was captured how, like, trivial being a human being is, like existence, how it can be agonizing to think all the time. And it reminds me of this lyric from the Smiths. I'll go walking towards Myanmar Mountain in the moon-illuminated August night, see gorgeous misty mountains rising to the horizon and like saying to me, you don't have to torture your consciousness with endless thinking. I'm singing, man is a busy little animal, a nice little animal. His thoughts about everything don't amount to shit. My old thoughts about the slit of a billion years covering all this and all cities and all generation eventually is just a dumb old thought. Only a silly, sober fool could think it. Imagine gloating over such nonsense. Bad review number, I fucking lost count. Bad review number something. I so rarely do this, but I quit this book halfway through because I detest Kerouac, a rotten human being. I want nothing more of his writing or thinking in my life. I wonder where this person came up with the thought that Kerouac was a rotten human being. Also, I'd like to point out, like, whenever I read a book, even though it may be autobiographical or like about the author, I try to separate the author from the work itself. Like, I don't think, wow, Jack Kerouac is this, and that, like when I'm reading it. When I read the book, I always assume it's through a persona that this author creates. Like this person creates this author persona, and then they create the book through this persona. Like the persona creates the book, not the author. So I like that separation between art and artist. I like to try to read books and as they are. I don't try to look at a book and think, what do these things say about the author? You know, like there's this opinion here. Does that mean that the author has this opinion as well? I don't think of things like that too much. Maybe it's inevitable, like sometimes, but I don't like fixate on stuff like that. I like to see art for itself. Like I feel like art stands alone for itself. At least that's how I like to interpret things, or like how I like to consume things. I found it interesting how his views on pot, like how it causes paranoia for him, and yet he's so into drinking. But that's not the point about pot paranoia. Yet maybe it is at that. I've long given it up because it bugs me anyway. Like for me, I do consider pot a much lighter and friendlier drug than alcohol, and less destructive. But that's just me. I like how he talks about the smallness of the self and the vastness of the world. And as far as I can see, the world is too old for us to talk about it with our new words. We will pass just as quietly through life, passing through, as the 10th century people of this valley, only with a little more noise and a few bridges and dams and bombs that won't even last a million years. The world being just what it is, moving and passing through, actually all right in the long view and nothing to complain about. It's time to think and watch and keep concentrated on the fact that after all this, the whole surface of the world as we know it now will be covered with a slit of a billion years in time. It's beautiful. It's very humbling, you know. Bad review number something. The author has a very troubled mind, very mixed up mind. Ramblings from a guy on drugs. And that's a passable summary. Closing thoughts. Big Sur makes me want to go up a mountain and just be alone and think about nothing. I went to Vancouver, where nature is on another level, and hiking trails and all that, in comparison to Eastern Canada. And there are mountains always in view. It was an adjustment not seeing those mountains anymore once I left Vancouver. And I visited a bit of North Vancouver as well, and it reminds me of this picture, Grouse Mountain. And when I read Big Sur, or when I think of Big Sur, I inevitably think of that kind of scenery. Anyway, thank you for watching this book report, and bye.